from Leonard on our independent line in Michigan. Is it Ypsilanti, Leonard?
Yes, it is, Gretchen. Good morning. How are you this morning?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yes, good morning, Representative.
Hi.
Anyhow, my question is with this Q&E with the Federal Reserve doing and the battle buds of wondering where to go through with cutting this, cutting that, with the sequester and all, doesn't Congress kind of within the Constitution holds back that once you guys are all elected, your parties are the Democrats, Republicans, Independents, you should be all unioned as one and do away with this to where get it figured out, do it, stop spending $240 million to a foreign country that, you know, for their infrastructure, another $45 million to Syria. I mean, these monies here that you're sending, who's representing it? Who's putting it out? Could you answer that, please?
Sure. Well, you know, I think that Secretary of State Kerry just said that he was going to release another $400 million to Egypt out of a total $1.6 billion package. Well, you know, and he said he did that because the needs that the Egyptian people have. I got news for him. We got needs right here at home. And so, you know, there's a lot of areas we can cut. Unfortunately, if we did away with all foreign aid, you're probably only talking about 1.5% of the budget. But, hey, that's 1.5% cut that we need to do. So, look, yeah, I'm for, you know, doing away with a lot of these conferences. I think there were $268 million spent on government conferences last year. You look at the amount of foreign aid that we give away, and there's a lot of decisions that could be made to better make these cuts, better utilize the cuts to get rid of some of the wasteful, frivolous duplicate stuff. Then, I mean, like saying no more tours of the White House, and I don't know if everybody has been to a tour of the White House, but it's a self-guided tour. So, yeah, we got some things that we need to deal with, both the Republicans and the Democrats. One of the things is we just need to be very honest about it. Trouble is how people perceive it on both sides of the aisle is somewhat quite different.
Recent story from Fox News said Secretary Kerry had announced a new aid for Syria opposition. That was a shift in U.S. policy. We heard this a couple of days ago. The Obama administration said it will provide the Syrian opposition with an additional $60 million in assistance, and in a significant policy shift, will for the first time provide non-lethal aid like food and medical supplies to the rebels. What do you think about that?
Well, you know, who are we supplying? Who are we sending this money to? I think as we saw in our intervention in Libya, which I was against, we sent a lot of weapons there and trained a lot of people, and some of these and did but could have taken a part in the murder of the 4 Americans in Benghazi. We don't even know what happened in Benghazi. We don't know what you know. We don't know what really led to it. We don't know what operations, who funded it, and we sent millions, billions of dollars over to Libya and helping people who really didn't know who they are, and the same thing in Syria. We don't really know who these people are, and I know that some of them belong to some of the terrorist group, and it goes back to that thing, you know, your enemies are my enemies. And once they get rid of Assad, then who knows what's going to happen. So I'm very leery of giving the aid to these people, even if it is the humanitarian aid.
What would you do instead?
Huh?
What would you do instead?
What would I do instead? Well, I probably better not say what I do instead. But you know, I mean, look, they're going to be fighting, and you know, let the Arab countries take care. I mean, you know, they know the sides, they know who's where, and so let the Arab countries settle this out. I mean, you know, the Arab countries are some of the richest countries in the world, and let them decide the outcome of this. This is, you know, we've got our own fish to fry.
Let's hear from Carl in Hedgesville, West Virginia, on a Republican's line. Good morning, Carl.
Good morning. You know, Senator Reid is a sly old fox. The reason he won't pass a budget, he don't want his people to make the tough votes that it takes to come up with a budget.
You're right.
And people like Paul Ryan comes up with a budget, and they tear it apart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's, my Lord, if people out here can't see that, and you know what, I a while ago, if the government would step back, the people would step in and help their brother. If my brother is struggling, and I know the government's going to step in and take care of him, I'm going to say, well, let the government do it.
Right.
And I believe if you give a man a fish, he'll eat one day. If you teach him how to fish, he's going to eat for life.
That's right.
It's a simple fact. And a lot of people out here don't understand that. I'm telling you, it's unreal. Our Constitution has been turned on its head. It's supposed to be the state's job to take care of their people,
right.
But it's turned around 180 degrees. The federal government takes all the money out of the states, and they try to take care of all the people.
Yep.
It's ridiculous.
Well, that's a great point. And in fact, when Medicaid and Medicare were passed in 1965 under Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society, Medicaid was intended to be for the sickest of the sick and the poorest of the poor. And I think the federal government was going to pay 80% and the states were going to pay 20%. Now it's probably something like a 50-50 split. And I believe in Georgia about 24% of the people qualify for some type of Medicaid or government assistance. That's crazy. If we were really treating what this was intended to do, the sickest of the sick and the poorest of the poor, we would be able to give those people the medical attention and the assistance that they need. But we have so many people that is fraud, waste, that are on these systems that the money does not really be able to do what it was intended to do. And it's the same thing as Social Security. And I'm not, condemning the Social Security disability, but, you look at how many people are on Social Security disability now, and it didn't start that long ago, and once that happens, they can't go back to work. They could, but there's not really an incentive for them to do it. And so the money that was paid into the Social Security for people that might not be able to get their benefits because there's so much waste, fraud, and abuse. So, we need to look at some of these programs and see if we can't figure out who really and truly need the services. But, there's nobody that knows that more than the communities herself. And when we take the community out of it and turn it over to some big federal agency where, they're the ones that tells you that you can get the disability, you can't get the disability, you can get Medicaid, you can't get Medicaid. We need to give that a little bit more local control where people are aware of what exactly is going on in their communities.
Congressman Westmoreland is in his 5th term representing Georgia's 3rd District. He sits on the Financial Services Committee, also Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and he's the Vice Chairman of the National Republican Congressional Committee. Recent story in the Washington Post says the GOP fears fallout of cuts. The sequester was only the first step. Now there's health and retirement benefits at issue. It says anxiety is rising among House Republicans about a strategy of appeasement toward fiscal hardliners that could require them to embrace not only the sequester, but also sharp new cuts to federal health and retirement programs. The story by Lori Montgomery says the strategy runs counter to warnings from prominent Republicans, such as Louisiana's Governor Bobby Jindal. He warned against becoming the party of austerity. Is there a danger in your party becoming the party of austerity?
Could be. I don't think so. When you get ill, sometimes the medicine that they give you is not very pleasant. And from the people I talk to, at least my generation, and I was born in 1952, the people I talk to that have children and grandchildren, I have 7 grandchildren, 3 children. I had rather take some of that pain myself. And, you know, if you look at the book, The Greatest Generation, those men and women sacrificed a great deal for us today. And all we're doing is kicking the can down the road to our children, our grandchildren, and I would say even now, our great-grandchildren. And I don't want to do that. I'd rather take the pain now. And so, and I think most Americans have, especially those that have children and grandchildren. We just don't want to kick it down the road. So these are some hard choices. And, you know, if you have a cut, the first thing you're going to do is clean that cut out. Because if they don't clean it out, it's never going to heal. You just don't put a Band-Aid on it. And that's what this federal government has been doing to a lot of our problems. They've never wanted to put the most painful, because we're politicians, you know, and you want everybody to like you, and you're going to try to help everybody, but we got to remove all that big stack of Band-Aids, and we got to clean some of this stuff out and start over so we can start some healing. And one of those things, to me, is the spending.
Let's go to Bellevue, Ohio, and hear from Mike, who's a Democrat. Good morning, Mike.
Morning.
Go right ahead.
I'd like to know what is corporate greed. I retired 3 years ago, and when I retired, I was making almost $22 an hour. And now the company I work for has cut their workforce by 2/3, and employees are making $10 an hour. So if you had more people working, they'd pay you more taxes, and that would help out in the government more too. And I just wondered what he could do about, is there anything he thinks about the gap between worker and employer?
All right, thanks, Mike.
Well, I mean, Mike, you know, I worked, I own my own business, but I've also, you know, worked for people. And, you know, the gap between what my boss was making and what I was making, you know, I didn't ever really worry about it. I mean, because I was working for something that my boss and I agreed that I would work for. He gave me incentives to work harder, which I did. And then I was rewarded for the hard work. But I never really worried about, you know, what the difference between my pay and his pay was, because he was doing his job and I was doing my job, and I was happy with where I was at. Now, had I not been, I could have gone to work, you know, somewhere else. So I just think that's real important that, you know, I mean, we don't need to be worried about what somebody else is doing. We need to be doing, you know, worried about what we're doing the best we can, and working as hard as we can. And you know, if you'll do that, then I think everything else will take care of itself. As
we looked at the record Dow average yesterday, here's a chart from the Huffington Post. You can see the Dow Jones Industrial Average there in green, and corporate profits after tax. That's compared to the average hourly earnings of both production and non-supervisory employees. Does that disparity concern you?
No. I mean, you know, the Dow's going up because the bonds, there's no, you know, like I said, you know, people that's got their money in government bonds were, you know, pretty secure investment. That return is, what, 0.75, you know, less than 1%. And so people are putting their money in stocks and taking a bigger risk with it. And, you know, corporate growth is good because, I mean, you know, look, I don't hate the word profit, because I was in business. I like the word profit. And if companies aren't profitable, then they can't expand and employ. And, you know, we're in an international competition right now, and as far as the wages goes, and I mean, you know, we've got a lot of states now that are going to the right to work states. If you look at Georgia, you know, we had Kia Motors come down, we've had Caterpillar, because we are a right to work state, and we think we have a good business environment. So if we're going to invite somebody down to our state to hire our workers and take advantage of the great things in Georgia that we have to offer them, should we question how much money they make?
Congressman Westmoreland started a business, as he mentioned, LAW Builders, back in his home state of Georgia. He also served in the Georgia State House for a dozen years before being elected to the United States House of Representatives. Let's hear from Tom in Little Elm, Texas, a Republican caller. Hi, Tom.
Good morning, y'all.
Hey, y'all, I like that.
I'll tell you one thing. I looked at this over quite a few years, and I found out the one thing that got us to where we are right now, as far as jobs, the economy, the finances, the whole 9 yards, the Fed's printing up all kinds of phony money. If you go back to the 103rd Congress, and this is directly for you, House Representative, if you go back to the 103rd Congress, the second session, and look up H.R. 5110, and that's the Uruguay Round Agreements. And if you study that closely, you can see where people have been losing money in their retirement plans as soon as they retired, all the way back, retro in that bill, all the way back to 1992. Now, I'll tell you, I figured it out on calculations using far advanced mathematics than anyone knows of today, because I did that myself. Mm-hmm. I invented it. Also, I have a degree just about in everything you can imagine, master's degree, that is, and others in doctorate degree. It took me 30 years to get that. But anyway, and I bought the books, by the way. I never went to college, but I bought the books from the students. Mm-hmm. So I have quite a library. But anyway, getting back to politics was my thing back since age of 5. I was talking to city council back in Baltimore, Maryland, and the Democrats just about ruined the place over there. Mm-hmm. That's why I moved down here to Texas.
Right.
My mom came from Tennessee, Irvine, Tennessee, and she moved up there during the war. But anyway,
Tom, let's see if you've given the congressman enough information to weigh in. Do you feel like you've got enough to go on?
Yeah, and I mean, you know, it sounds like you're a very intelligent guy, and to get all those degrees without going to college is really, you know, my hat's off to you for that. But, you know, the retirement systems there, and the fact that our 401ks or whatever, I mean, those are investments. And, you know, like you said, with knowledge of math and all, you should be able to figure that out. But, you know, we're really doing things to try to keep some of these investment banks or individual people that advise on investments. We're trying to over-regulate them, too. So as far as our retirement goes, we need to be doing more things to encourage people to be able to invest in the system and get the rewards of the system.
Congressman, your home state of Georgia was in the news last week because the Supreme Court took up the Voting Rights Act, Section 5 of that. It's a case that relates back to Shelby County, Alabama. We saw some reporting afterwards saying that if Wednesday's argument before the Supreme Court is any indication, a majority of the justices seemed inclined to strike down or curtail key sections of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Even if the court does move in that direction, election officials in some states will have more leeway to change some procedures, but voters in 2014 won't suddenly wake up in 1964, writes Tom Curry for NBC. What do you think about the case before the Supreme Court?
Well, Section 5 is something that's been questioned, you know, for a while. Basically, Section 5 is the pre-clearance part of it. If you're going to change a voting precinct, or, you know, you got to have your ballots approved, the number of voting machines you have to have in each precinct based on the number of registered voters. And it's based, you know, on a presidential election that happened 50 years ago. And so we're not going to ever change the outcome of that election. We're not going to ever change the outcome of who voted and who didn't vote, who was registered and who wasn't registered. And so when and plus, you got to remember, in 1965, when the Voting Rights Act was passed, it was passed 5 years. And in 1970, they renewed it again for 7 years. And then it was renewed for 25 years. And now, in 2006, we renewed it for another 25 years. So we're going to be under these same things that, you know, procedures and numbers that we were under in